Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Hannah if you're new here, and in today's video I'm going to be doing my reading guide for T. Kingfisher. Now, transparently, I haven't read every single thing that T. Kingfisher has written. I have, however, completed 20 of her novellas, novels, and one short story. So I feel like I have a pretty good grasp of this author if you need my credentials. But how I structure these videos is I talk about the author just briefly, and then I break down their books into usually genre categories, and then I talk about each book that they've written in that genre or subgenre, and then at the end of this video I will talk about where I think you should start with this author. This author is quite diverse in the terms of what they write. They don't just write one genre or one age range. T. Kingfisher writes young adult, middle grade, adult, horror, fantasy, you name it. She definitely has like a wide variety of genres, and so it could be maybe a little confusing or overwhelming, especially with the body of work that she has, figuring out where to start. So I'm going to give you my recommendations, and I'm also going to talk about my ratings of each book as well as which ones are my favorite, because my favorite T. Kingfisher books may or may not be the places where I think you should start with this author. What I can say about all of T. Kingfisher's writing is that she writes whimsical, weird, wacky, kind of funny works, whether that be in fantasy, in horror, or in a fairy tale like story. What I think is really, impressive about this author is she writes, or she publishes anywhere between 2 and 4 books a year. I think in 2023 she published 4 works, 3 novellas. I believe it was 3 novellas and 1 full-length novel. So she is prolific, and she is constantly pumping out work, and not only is that awesome, and she's feeding her readers, but they're actually good. Sometimes you worry about the quality diminishing with the speed of publication, but I don't think T. Kingfisher's quality has reduced by any means. Like I've said in the intro of this video, I've read 20 of her works. There are some of her older titles, some of her older works that my library didn't have, so that's why I haven't read them all. But with 20 books to talk about, let's go. So the first category we're going to be talking about is middle grade / young adult. Now, T. Kingfisher is a pen name, and the woman who is T. Kingfisher, her name is Ursula Vernon, and Ursula Vernon writes children's books under her own name, but she also, under T. Kingfisher, does middle grade and young adult. So there's a little bit of a crossover here, but I'm going to talk about all of her middle grade and young adult fantasy. Minor Mage is about Oliver, and he is a very minor magician. He only knows 3 spells, and he has an armadillo companion, and one of those spells just happens to be how to alleviate his armadillo allergies. So you can tell by my summary that this is a very whimsical and silly book, but this also has a lot of darker themes in it, as well as Oliver goes on an adventure to save his village, who is suffering from drought. I gave Minor Mage 4 stars. Then we have A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking by T. Kingfisher. I also gave this one 4 stars. This is about a young girl named Mona who works in a bakery because her magic has to do with baking. She can manipulate dough and bread, and she has a sourdough companion who is sentient, and it's wonderful. And one day a body turns up dead in the bakery, and Mona is framed for the murder. So not only is she trying to evade getting, prosecuted for a crime she didn't commit, but she's also trying to solve the murder, which then opens up a larger political plot line. I would say this one is more young adults than middle grade, but I think Mona is only 13 or 14 years old, so it's kind of in that gray area, in my opinion. Then we have Illuminations, which is about Rosa, and Rosa is part of a family of illuminators, and illuminators are painters who can imbue their paintings with small magics, such as making the trash not smell and keeping rats away from the kitchen, etc., etc. And one day, Rosa finds a box and opens it and unwittingly unleashes a magical creature that is hell-bent on causing mischief for her family. This is a story of family, friendship, jealousy, growing up, and loving the people around you. And I gave Illuminations, I believe, 3.25 stars. And last in the middle grade / young adult category, we have 9 Goblins. Now this is a story about a war between goblins and other creatures, humans, and this is about 9 goblin soldiers who accidentally get transported in the middle of a battle across enemy lines, and so they have to find a way to get home, get back to the front, and evade all of the, spies and the soldiers of the enemy army. This also has a ranger type character who lives in the woods, who is an elf, and his whole shtick is being a veterinarian to injured woodland creatures, and the goblins and this elf cross paths, and that's all I'll say. And I gave this one 4 stars as well. I'm pretty sure all of T. Kingfisher's middle grade / young adult that I've read is like in the 3.5, 4-star range. I really enjoy her work there. The next category I want to tackle is adult dark fairy tales. And I would even go far as to say gothic fairy tales. This isn't quite horror, but this does have more of a darker fairy tale tone to it. And of course, the book I have to start with is Nettle and Bone by T. Kingfisher. This is the first book that I read by T. Kingfisher and what got me hooked on her to begin with. Nettle and Bone is about Mara, and Mara is a little bit of an older protagonist. I believe she's 35, and her sister is married to a tyrant who abuses her. So Mara is on a quest to save her sister from her evil husband, and along the way we find a fairy godmother, a former paladin or a former soldier, a demon chicken, and friends and adventure ensue. This is truly an adventure quest story, and I thought it was a blast. This does have a little bit of a darker tone to it in terms of the fairy tale nature of this, but this is also just like a great adventure. Nettle and Bone was also a 4-star for me. Thornhedge is the next book we have to talk about. This was also a 4-star for me. This is a twist on the Girl in the Tower fairy tale. This is actually about a creature named Toadling who has been looking over a sleeping girl in the tower, but this is Toadling's story, not the Girl in the Tower story, and kind of what happens. And this one's a very short novella, so I don't want to give too much away, but this is kind of a spin or a retelling of a classic fairy tale with a dark twist, I will say. There's a little bit of a teeny smidge of maybe of a romance, but I wouldn't say romance is T. Kingfisher's focus, if that makes sense. There's little hints of romantic relationships in most of her work, not her middle grade and young adult, but her adult work, but it's not, I wouldn't call it romantic-y or anything like that. Then we have Bryony and Roses, and unfortunately this is a T. Kingfisher that I really didn't like. This is a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and I gave it 2 stars. I really didn't think T. Kingfisher, in my opinion, did anything really fun and unique and interesting with the Beauty and the Beast retelling, but that's neither here nor there. But if you're interested in Beauty and the Beast retellings, T. Kingfisher has got you covered. Then we have straight up fantasy as a category. And now all of T. Kingfisher's fantasy that I have sectioned off here is in the same world. So I'm going to talk about all of these books in order of publication because that is kind of chronologically the order of this world, if that makes sense. So the first book in this world is Clockwork Boys, and this is about a forger, an assassin, possessed paladin, and a scholar going on an adventure to, again, cross enemy lines and go to an enemy city because they are at war with this city who are churning out these giant automatons, and the collection of adventurers have to kind of go to the heart of the city and discover the secrets behind these automatons to try and destroy them. And I will say the sequel, this is a 2-book series. The sequel to this is called The Wonder Engine. It's a direct sequel, and in the acknowledgments in the back of the book, T. Kingfisher has said that this was one book that her publisher told her to split into, and in my opinion, it truly reads like one story. So in my personal opinion, I would read these back to back with no breaks in between, because it really does feel like only one story. So I think that's why I gave Clockwork Boys like 4.25 stars, because you really needed the second book. Like, the first book didn't really stand on its own to me. It was definitely one book that was split in half. And it wasn't even in half. The first book is like 250 pages and the second one is like 350 pages. So all of that to say, this is a duology. I would read it as one book. I gave Clockwork Boys 4.25 out of 5 stars and Wonder Engine 4 stars. So a pretty solid series. And this is the first books in T. Kingfisher's world. Then we have Swordheart, which is a standalone, and I gave this one 4.25 stars. This is about a woman who inherits all of her like great uncle's possessions and his home because she was his caretaker, and now his family is mad at this woman because they wanted the inheritance, even though they weren't really involved in the great uncle's life. And so they've kidnapped this woman, and she is a victim in her own home. She can't leave, and so she vows to kill herself. So please check trigger warnings for suicide. She attempts to commit suicide by grabbing a sword off of the wall, and the sword comes to life. A man appears out of the sword, and he vows to protect her. So this is about the two of them fleeing the house and going on an adventure to try and get her family away from her and away from her house so she can be free of them and live with her inherited money. And I gave Swordheart 4.25 out of 5 stars. This one is definitely more romantic. It has, I wouldn't say again it's heavy on the romance, but there is a fairly significant romantic subplot in Swordheart. Then we have the Saints of Steel, and the Saints of Steel series is my favorite T. Kingfisher series, because I'd say of all of T. Kingfisher's works, these are the most romantic. Each book follows a different romantic pairing. And the first book in the series is Paladin's Grace. I deeply, deeply love this book, so bear with me and my biases. This is about Stephen, who is a paladin, and his god has died. And so his order of paladins are kind of broken. And so they get hired and taken care of by the Temple of the White Rat. And now the Temple of the White Rat, their whole ethos is making the world a better place for people. So they are, they have lawyers, and they just go out and try to help people. And one day Stephen is trying to help this doctor kind of navigate a rough neighborhood, and he's accosted by a woman named Grace, and she is a perfumer who is in a bit of trouble. And of course a romance ensues between them, and I love this book dearly. This is so sweet. Stephen is such a sweetheart. He knits socks for his brothers and sisters in arms, and I love the romance. I love the plot in here. I wouldn't say this is cozy by any means. It's cozy in tone, but there is a serial killer plot line happening. So like, that's what I kind of like about T. Kingfisher, is that she kind of toys with tone and seriousness. I think she's great, and I think she's hilarious, and I love the tone of all her work, but I could see how it would be maybe off-putting to some people. But I gave Paladin's Grace 4.5 out of 5 stars. And upon subsequent reads, I think I rate this even higher. Then we have Paladin's Strength, which is about Istvan and Clara. Istvan is one of Stephen's brothers-in-arms, and Clara's is a nun, and all of her sisters were kidnapped by these, marauders, and she is on a quest to save them. So she teams up with Istvan to go on an adventure to save her sisters. And I gave Paladin's Strength 4 stars. Now, the third book in this series, Paladin's Hope, is unfortunately a little bit of a disappointment. It is the shortest book in the series, and the main plot and the romantic subplot suffers because of it. This is about the Paladin Galen, who is again another one of the Paladins of the Saints of Steel, and Dr. Piper, who are again solving a different set of murders that are cropping up. And while this is gay, and I really appreciate T. Kingfisher having a queer romance fantasy, again, it's too short. The answers fall too easily into the laps of the protagonists, and the romance, while I like them in theory as a couple, there's not a lot of romantic development in here to make their relationship feel earned. So, unfortunately, Paladin's Hope is not my favorite, and I give this one 3 stars. Now, Paladin's Faith is the 4th book in this series. In this one, we're following Shane, another Paladin, and Marguerite. And now Marguerite is best friends with Grace, and Marguerite is a spy. I don't think that's a spoiler to say, but I might bleep that out later. And so Shane is on a quest to help Marguerite complete one of her missions, and it turns out there are people after Marguerite and Shane trying to kill them both. And this is excellent. I gave this one 5 stars. I think this is a really solid installment in the series. It has the most interesting plot, the most interesting mystery, and I just am really flabbergasted by this one. I really like, there's a little bit of smut in here. There's a little bit of smut in all of the Saints of Steel books, but I think this one is one of my favorites in terms of that, but I can't wait to read more, and I absolutely loved this installment. So the Saints of Steel is not complete. There are 3 other Paladins who we have not gotten stories about. Now, I don't know if we're going to get a book per Paladin, but it is heavily implied that there will be at least one more installment featuring hopefully one of the female Paladins. There are 2 women Paladins of the Saints of Steel who survived. All right, the next category for T. Kingfisher is horror. And first we're going to talk about The Hollow Places. This is my favorite T. Kingfisher horror. This is about Kara, who is returning to live with her uncle. Her uncle kind of has some bad health issues, and so she's like returning to help him out, and he runs a curiosity museum. And in the Curiosity Museum, Kara stumbles across a portal to other dimensions. And this is a really spooky time. I was sick to my stomach reading this book, which is my favorite feeling when I'm reading a horror book. And I think this one is excellent. I gave this one 4.25 out of 5 stars. Then we have What Moves the Dead. This is about a sworn soldier named Alex Easton, and they get a letter from one of their childhood friends who they haven't spoken to in over a decade. And this childhood friend is in dire medical straits and is in trouble and begs Alex to go to their house. And so Alex shows up at their house, and all is not well. The house is very spooky, as well as there's some kind of medical mystery going on as well with his friend. And this one I gave 4.25 out of 5 stars. This is a novella. It's very short and it's very creepy, which I love. The sequel to What Moves the Dead is What Feasts the Night, and this is about, again, Alex Easton returning to their home country and their hunting lodge that they live in, but all is not well at their hunting lodge. And unfortunately, I didn't love this sequel as much, and I gave this one 3 stars. I just didn't find this one as scary or as ominous as the first book of the series. Then we have A House with Good Bones, which is another 3-star horror for me. This is about Sam, who her mother has been like behaving weirdly, and like on their phone call conversations has been kind of acting strange, and so her brother asks Sam to check up on their mother. The house is painted like boring beige where it used to be so like full of life, and there's kind of an ominous vibe happening at this house, and her mother is acting bizarrely. And again, this is a 3-star. I didn't love this one. Again, just didn't have that ooky tummy feeling. Then we have Origin Story, which is the one short story I will be talking about in this video, and this is about a monster creating another monster, and it's incredibly short and nothing happens, and I hated it, and I gave it 1.5 stars. I would skip this one. Of all of the books I've talked about, I would, if any of them sound interesting, even if I've given it like a 3-star or lower, I would recommend giving it a try if the synopsis intrigues you. But this one I actively don't recommend. I disrecommend. I unrecommend this one. Then we have The Twisted Ones, which for me is a 3-star read, and this is about a young woman named Mouse, and her I believe her grandmother passes away. Yeah, her grandmother has passed away, and her father asks her to go to the house to get it ready to sell because he just like can't emotionally handle it. And Mouse finds like some journals and from her grandmother, and there's some creepy, ominous things afoot within the pages as well as surrounding the house. And again, this one was just an okay horror for me. I did not think it was as creepy as The Hollow Places, personally. So, we're at the end of the video. So I'm gonna briefly summarize my favorite T. Kingfisher books, and then I'm going to give you recommendations where I think you should start with this author. Obviously, if you're interested in a particular genre, go with that. But this is like my general recommendations for anyone kind of interested in T. Kingfisher as an author. So my favorite books by T. Kingfisher are The Hollow Places, which is the horror story, the Saints of Steel series, but specifically Paladin's Grace, and then the 4th book, Paladin's Faith, which I think are like the best in the series, but I love the Saints of Steel and their fantasy work. And then I really like What Moves the Dead, which is the novella horror. I've read What Moves the Dead twice now, and upon a subsequent read, it was even better than the first time I read it. So I think those are my favorite T. Kingfishers. As for where I think you should start with T. Kingfisher, if you want to get into her fantasy, I would actually start with Clockwork Boys, which is the first book in her fantasy world. I think it's, for me, I started with Paladin's Grace, and there was a lot of references to Clockwork Boys and Swordheart, and so I think it would have been cool if I had started with Clockwork Boys and worked my way chronologically through this world, even though they're very separate stories. You've got the Clock Tower Wars duology, Swordheart as a standalone, and then the Saints of Steel. They're all very self-contained, but I think it would have been really cool if I had worked through them chronologically, just so I could understand all of the references and hidden meanings. If you're interested in her horror, but you're maybe not a horror reader, I would maybe start with Nettle and Bone. This is one of the dark fairy tales. This is how I was introduced to T. Kingfisher, and I think this book does a really good job of balancing the tone, atmosphere, characters, and plot, as well as you get an idea of her writing and her kind of humorous and whimsical tone in a slightly darker setting. So if you're maybe not a horror reader quite yet, but you're interested in like dipping your toes in, I'd say Nettle and Bone is one that is like just a little taste of horror. Dip your little toe in and then maybe move on to What Moves the Dead. If you're interested in her middle grade or you're a young adult reader, I would definitely read A Wizard's Guide to Defensive Baking. I think this is her best middle grade / young adult book, and I think this one is just a lot of fun with the main character and her powers and the murder mystery that she has to solve. And this actually balloons into a bigger political plot as well, which I think is a lot of fun. So those are my recommendations, and that's what I have to say about T. Kingfisher. If you made it to the end of this video, you're a real one. I really appreciate you. What's your favorite T. Kingfisher? Have you read this author? Are you gonna try this author? I would love to know all of that in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in another video of mine very soon. Bye.